In the world of high-end private equity, invisibility was a skill Bridget Callum had perfected over 7 years, not the kind of invisibility that came from shyness or insecurity, though people always assumed that glancing at her full figure and making their quiet calculations. No, Bridget's invisibility was surgical, deliberate. She had learned early that in a firm like Voss Capital, the smartest person in the room was almost never the one talking, so she stayed quiet, kept her head down, and built herself into the kind of institutional knowledge that a place simply could not function without. She knew every active deal in the portfolio, every LP relationship, every side letter, every covenant, buried in a credit agreement from 2019 that nobody else had bothered to read. She knew which bankers called back and which ones needed a third follow-up. She knew the building's cleaning crew by name, Felix on Monday nights, Guadalupe on Thursdays, because Bridget noticed things. That was her gift. That was also, as it turned out, her liability. Beckett Voss did not notice her. That was not entirely unusual. Beckett noticed very few people outside the narrow band of individuals who could either threaten him or be useful to him in the next 48 hours. He was 39, the second-generation founder of the firm his father had built, and he had rebuilt entirely from the inside out, and he moved through the world the way a storm system moves, with total self-assurance, leaving disruption in his wake without ever seeming to try. He was not conventionally handsome in the way of men who knew they were handsome. He was something harder than that. Darker. The kind of face that made people look twice, not because it was beautiful, but because it was difficult to read, and human beings are helpless against a puzzle. Bridget had stopped noticing his face approximately 3 years ago. Or she had trained herself to stop noticing. The distinction had blurred somewhere around year 2. She processed his calendar, his correspondence, his capital calls, and board prep decks, and the occasional personal matter he handed off without looking up from his desk. She sat 30 feet from his office. She had spoken to him in 7 years perhaps 400 times, and she could recall with uncomfortable precision every single one of those conversations. That was the thing about invisibility. You saw everything. You remembered everything. You felt everything quietly, in a room where no one was watching. The night the building went into lockdown, Bridget was the last person on the floor. It was a Thursday in February, which in Chicago meant a wind that came off Lake Michigan like a physical insult. She had stayed late to finish a model for a deal. Beckett was presenting to the investment committee in the morning. A logistics company in Memphis that the rest of the team had underwritten optimistically, to put it charitably. Bridget had found 3 assumptions that didn't hold. She was fixing them without being asked, because that was what she did, and because the alternative was watching Beckett walk into a room and be wrong, which was something she found, privately, intolerable. She didn't examine why. She was on the 41st floor when the building's security system tripped. Later, she would learn it was triggered by a credible threat. Someone had called in a specific and detailed warning about the firm, about Beckett specifically, and building security had followed protocol. But in the moment, all Bridget knew was that the elevator banks went dark. An alarm she had never heard before began sounding in a low, insistent tone, and the heavy door to the emergency stairwell sealed itself with a hydraulic finality that made her stomach drop. "Don't move." The voice came from behind her, and she did not move, partly from the instruction, partly from pure adrenaline, seizing her muscles. Then she recognized it. Beckett. She turned. He was standing at the edge of the bullpen, jacket still on, phone in hand. He had apparently come back for something. She would find out later. It was a physical document he needed for morning, a signed term sheet he'd left in his desk drawer. He looked at her the way he sometimes did, like he was briefly recalibrating. What is this person doing here? What is their name? How do they factor into my immediate problem? And then something shifted in his expression. "Callum," he said. "Not a question. We need to get to the safe room." He was already moving toward the north corridor, and the implicit assumption that she would follow was so complete so unexamined that she did. Because, of course, she did. She knew where the safe room was. She had updated the building emergency protocols herself 18 months ago after the firm's COO had asked her to review them and then forgotten he'd asked. The room was not large. It was built into the building's core, windowless, climate-controlled, equipped with a dedicated landline, a first aid kit, water, 2 days of provisions, and a reinforced steel door that bolted from the inside. The walls were poured concrete. The lighting was a strip of LD along the ceiling, color adjustable for some reason that no one had ever explained to Bridget, currently defaulting to a low amber that made the room feel like the inside of a photograph. Beckett bolted the door. He called building security. He was given a measured, professional non-answer. "We are assessing the situation. Please remain in place. We will update you." And he absorbed this with the patience of a man who was accustomed to situations he could not immediately control, which was to say not much patience at all. He set his phone on the small metal table and looked at her. "You were still here," he said. "I was finishing the Memphis model." A pause. "On your own time. It needed to be right." She sat down in one of the 2 chairs the room contained, because her legs had decided the adrenaline portion of the evening was over and they were ready to stop working. The revenue growth assumptions in Section 4 were using a CAGR from a period that included a one-time contract that won't repeat. If you present it as is, Marcus Hale is going to find it in about 30 seconds and you'll spend the rest of the meeting on defense. Beckett looked at her for a moment that was slightly longer than his usual allocation. "You know Marcus Hale's analytical habits," he said. "I've sat in on every IC meeting for 4 years. Another pause. "I know you have." She didn't say anything to that. She wasn't sure what there was to say. He sat down in the other chair, which put approximately 4 feet between them, which in a room this size was not very much. He loosened his tie, a small automatic gesture she had never seen before, because she had never been in a small room with him at 11:30 at night. And for the first time in 7 years, Bridget Callum saw Beckett Voss look tired. Not defeated, not diminished, just tired. The way a person looks when they are alone, or think they are, and they stop performing the version of themselves the world requires. "How long have you been with the firm?" he asked. 7 years in April. 7 years. He said it like he was doing math. "Before my father retired, he interviewed me." Beckett looked up. His father, Graham Voss, had stepped back from the firm 5 years ago, a transition that had been handled with the kind of deliberate, structured grace that disguised, to most observers, the significant friction involved. Bridget had not been most observers. "He was kind," she said simply. "He remembered my name the second time I came in." Something moved across Beckett's face that she couldn't quite name. "He's good at that." "You're not," she said, and then stopped, because that had come out without permission. Beckett did not look offended. He looked, if anything, like she had said something accurate that he was deciding how to receive. "No," he said finally. The room was quiet. Outside, somewhere, the city continued its enormous indifference. "Callum," he said. Bridget, it was the first time she had heard him say her first name. She registered this the way you register a temperature change, not dramatically, but completely, in every nerve. "What's in the model that I need to know before morning?" And because this was safe ground, because this was the version of herself she had spent 7 years perfecting, she told him. She walked him through the corrected assumptions, the revised revenue trajectory, the 3 questions she anticipated from the committee, and the answers she would recommend. She talked for 20 minutes. He listened, actually listened, the way he rarely did in meetings, without his phone, without the invisible hum of 10 other priorities competing for his attention. And he asked 2 questions, both good ones, and she answered them. Asked. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "You should be in the room tomorrow. I'm not a senior associate. I'm aware of your title." His voice had an edge to it, but not the usual kind, not impatience. Something closer to frustration directed inward. "I'm saying you should be in the room. You've been doing the work. You should be in the room." Bridget looked at the amber wall and said nothing. "Why didn't you ever say something?" he asked. "Because no one asked." The silence after that was different from the silences before it. She would not remember, afterward, exactly how the next part happened. She would remember the order of things, that he asked her something personal, something unexpected, about where she was from and whether she had family in Chicago. And she answered honestly, because it was late, and she was tired, and the room was the size of a confession booth. She would remember that he laughed once, genuinely, at something she said. Not the controlled, social laugh she had heard him deploy in client dinners, but a real one, short and surprised. She would remember that at some point, the amber light had more like something else, something warmer and more dangerous, and Nisha noticed the way Duve-like a tiredness made him look like a person instead of a force of nature. She would remember that she was the one who reached across the table. She would not be able to explain why, except that 7 years of noticing everything had created a kind of pressure, and the room was sealed, and for once in her life there was no one watching. She did not believe in adrenaline as an excuse. She had examined that explanation carefully in the weeks that followed and found it insufficient. What happened in that room was not adrenaline. It was 7 years of accumulated reality, finally allowed to take up space. The building cleared at 2 a.m. The threat, it turned out, had been a disgruntled former employee with a grudge and poor judgment, neither dangerous nor credible by the time the police finished their assessment. Security knocked on the safe room door. Beckett unbolted it. They walked out into the empty 41st floor, and the overhead fluorescence came back on, and the spell, if that was what it had been, broke. Beckett looked at her. His expression was composed again, the architecture of his face rebuilt into something controlled and unreadable. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll see you at 9, and he walked to the elevator. Bridget stood in the bullpen for a long moment, listening to the fluorescence hum. She went home. She slept very little. She came in at 8:45 because she was always early, and she sat at her desk, and at 9 o'clock Beckett walked past her to his office and said "Good morning" in the same voice he used every day, and that was the end of it. For the next 6 weeks nothing changed. He did not bring it up. He did not look at her differently. She was again the furniture. The institutional memory. The woman who fixed the models no one else bothered to read carefully. She told herself this was fine. She had always been good at telling herself things were fine. She found out on a random Tuesday in April, in the bathroom on the 41st floor, at 7 in the morning before anyone else arrived. She had bought the test at the CVS 3 blocks away the previous night and carried it to work in her bag, because she could not bring herself to take it at home, in her apartment, where the result would be a private catastrophe with no witnesses. This logic made no sense. She understood that. She took the test anyway. She sat on the floor of the bathroom stall for approximately 4 minutes, looking at the result. Then she put it in her bag, stood up, washed her hands, and went to her desk. She worked with focused precision for 2 hours. She answered emails. She updated the deal tracker. She had a call with a banker at 9 that she handled without any indication that her entire life had just structurally shifted. When the call ended, she sat for a long moment looking at the Memphis deal tombstone on her desk. They had closed it 3 weeks prior successfully, and she made a decision. She could not stay, not because of shame. She had moved past the reflex of shame before the bathroom floor was warm, but because she was 31 years old, and she was not going to raise a child in the shadow of a man who had looked through her for 7 years, who had given her one night of genuine seeing and then closed the shutters again, like it was nothing. She was not going to be a footnote in Beckett Voss's story. She was going to be the entire story of her own. She had a contact at a smaller fund in Austin, a woman she'd met at a conference 2 years ago who had tried to recruit her and been turned down. She sent an email. She began quietly compiling what she would need. She gave herself 2 weeks. She made it to 11 days. The morning she intended to submit her resignation letter, She arrived at her desk at the usual time, opened her email and found a calendar invite from Beckett for a one-on-one at 10. This happened occasionally, not often, but occasionally, and usually involved a task he needed done quickly and quietly. She accepted it. She told herself she would resign at 10:15. At 10 o'clock, she walked into his office. He was standing at the window, which faced north and east toward the lake, the skyline arranged behind him in the particular way that made the city look like a promise someone had actually kept. He turned when she came in. He looked at her with that expression she had spent 2 weeks trying not to think about, the one she'd seen in the safe room when he'd stopped performing. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "You're leaving." It was not a question. She felt something cold move through her, very fast. "How? You sent a message to Keely Moran at Stratum Capital at 6:58 in the morning, 2 weeks ago. Keely and I were at Stanford together." She mentioned it. He paused. She was excited. "She said you were the best hire she never made." Bridget said nothing. The cold feeling had sharpened into something precise. "I want to know why," he said. "I have a professional opportunity." "Bridget." His voice was quiet, not threatening, something else. "We've been dancing around something for 11 days. I am asking you directly. Tell me why you're leaving." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the ways she could answer this question without answering it. She was excellent at that. 7 years of practice. But she was also 31 years old, and she was going to be a mother, and she was tired. Not the bone-deep exhausted kind, not yet, though that was coming, but tired of being careful, tired of being invisible, tired of making herself small in a room where she contained, as it turned out, an entire other person. "I'm pregnant," she said. The office was very quiet. Beckett did not move for a moment that lasted somewhere between 2 seconds and a geological era. Then he set down the pen he had been holding, which she noticed he had picked up without knowing it, and he looked at her with an expression she had no category for. "How long have you known?" 11 days. And you were going to leave without telling me." It wasn't accusatory. It was something. She searched his face and found something that looked impossibly like injury. "Yes," she said, because she was done pretending. "Why? Because you looked right through me for 7 years, Beckett. Because I spent one night being real with you, and you walked out of that elevator and went back to seeing me as furniture, and I am not." She stopped, steadied herself. "I am not going to build a life around a man who decides I'm real only when it's convenient for him." The silence was different this time. Heavier. Earned. Beckett moved away from the window. He crossed the office, not quickly, not with the urgency of a man making a dramatic gesture, but deliberately, the way he moved when he had made a decision and was executing it, and he stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up slightly, which she always hated, and which she noticed he had done intentionally, and which she found, against all her better judgment, did something to the air in her lungs. "You're right," he said. She had not expected that. "I looked through you. I did that. I have been doing it since you started here, and the fact that I had a reason." He stopped. Something shifted in his jaw. "The fact that I had reasons I told myself were professional doesn't make it something I'm going to defend to you." "I'm not going to do that. I'm not asking for an apology. I know you're not. You never ask for anything." There was something in his voice. Not tenderness, not exactly, but something in that neighborhood. "That's on me, too." Bridget looked at him. She had spent 7 years reading the room, reading the situation, reading every available signal. It was what she did. It was her gift and her curse. And what she read right now was not a man making a calculation. It was a man who had been struck, finally, with the specific gravity of a thing he had been avoiding looking at directly. "I'm not staying because you feel guilty," she said. "I'm not asking you to stay for that. I'm not staying because of the baby. I know. Then why would I stay?" He reached out and took her hand. It was a simple gesture. Her hand in both of his, the way someone holds something they are deciding how to hold, and he said, quietly, "Because I see you now. I know that doesn't make up for 7 years. I know you have no reason to believe it changes anything. But I need you to know that I see you, Bridget. The work and the person and everything in that room that neither of us has said out loud since February." He paused. "And I'm asking you not to go to Austin. I'm asking you to stay. Not for me, or not only for me, but because this is where you built something, and it's yours, and I want to build the next thing with you." She stood in his office for a long moment, holding all of that. "You have a lot of ground to make up," she said finally. "I know, starting with the IC meeting tomorrow, there are 2 more assumptions in the Denver deal that need work." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. "Is that a yes?" "It's a maybe," she said. "And in the meantime, you're going to fix those assumptions yourself, because you're capable of it, and you need to stop delegating the hard thinking to people you're not paying enough." He laughed. The real one, the short, surprised one she had heard exactly once before, in a room with amber light and a bolted door, and she felt it in her chest like a tuning fork. 3 months later, Beckett Voss called an all-hands meeting. This was not unusual. He held them quarterly. What was unusual was the agenda, which listed only 1 item, and the fact that he asked Bridget to stand up. She had not known he was going to do this. She found out the same way everyone else did when he said her name. She stood. 64 people were looking at her, the entire firm, associates and analysts and partners, and the 2 administrative staff she had worked alongside for years. And she stood in the way she had always stood, with her full weight and her full height and her full presence, because she had spent 31 years learning not to apologize for the space she occupied, even when the world suggested she should. "Most of you know Bridget Callum," Beckett said, "and for those of you who don't, that's a you problem, because she has been the structural backbone of this firm for 7 years, and she has been doing it without the title, the compensation, or the credit that she has earned." He paused. "That changes today. Bridget is being promoted to Managing Director of Portfolio Operations, effective immediately. She will have authority over deal execution, IC process, and the operational review of every active investment." The room was very quiet. "She is also," he added, and his voice had shifted into something quieter, more deliberate, "going to be the mother of my child. I want the firm to know both of those things, because both of them are true, and she has spent long enough in this building letting one truth take up less space than it deserved." The applause started somewhere in the back and moved forward. Bridget did not cry. She was not, in general, a person who cried in professional settings, but she felt something release in her chest, something she had been holding with both hands for a very long time, and she let it go quietly, while 64 people looked at her and finally saw her. Later, when the meeting had dispersed and the well-wishers had drifted back to their desks, Beckett came to stand beside her at the window that faced the lake. "How was that?" he asked. "Adequate," she said. He looked at her. "Good," she said. It was good. Outside, the lake was doing what the lake always did. Enormous, indifferent silver in the afternoon light, and Chicago arranged itself around it as it had for 2 centuries, making room for everything, and explaining nothing, the way cities do when they are large enough to hold the full weight of a person's life without noticing. Bridget Callum had spent 7 years being the city's best-kept secret in a 41st-floor office. She was done with that now.